Emma, good morning to you. What would you like to say?
Good morning. I'm a teacher, so I know how discipline is in schools, but I want to talk about the immigration issue. I'm from an army background, and discipline is really key to this society working. What I want to suggest, controversially, is that if these people are coming off the boats in England and we can't handle them, they don't have any paperwork, what we need to do is to put them into barracks, and they have to do, and we must bring back. There is, let me think, there is Switzerland, Austria, Finland, Greece, Estonia, Cyprus, Denmark. They've never got rid of conscription. These people really want to be here and work here. Then they can do their 2 years service in this country and support us. And if their country is in a state of war, then they can take those experiences and that knowledge and experience back to their own country.
Will the army want them, Emma, is my question. I remember speaking to someone who was quite senior in the army, and they said, we actually don't want people who don't want to be conscribed. We don't want people fighting for us or having to train them if they don't want to be there.
Well, then they shouldn't be here.
Okay.
If you're going to willing to come into this country and have £51,000 paid for you on the back of me as a taxpayer and my husband, then you have to give something back before you can have that.
Okay.
And that's what I'm asking you to do.
All right, Emma, it's one idea. Thank you very, very much indeed. That's Emma in Shropshire there. Well, I'm delighted that Luke Gittos, who is Director of the Freedom Law Association, who is a solicitor, is here with us, as is Matthew Laza, who is a former Labour Party advisor. Gentlemen, you're both very, very welcome. Matthew, what do you think of that thought from Emma there in Shropshire?
Well, I think it reflects the anger there is out there, and the Tim who'd texted in as well was absolutely clear. People after Brexit thought that, you know, take back control. They were promised something and they've been delivered the complete opposite. The government has actually managed to devise an immigration, I say policy advisedly, because I think that's being rather generous.
Policy would suggest they've thought it out.
Exactly, which is allowing more people from outside into the country, and not just that, but people who are bringing their families and who are going to be here for the long term. One of the things about EU migration was a lot of people came for sort of limited periods of time and then went back. That was the kind of, you know, roundabout that was the very cycle that was the very idea of free movement. So people like me who are Remainers were all told, you know, we're going to have migration's going to be sorted. Well, it has been sorted, but in completely the wrong direction. And the anger out there is absolutely palpable, which is what the Tories have faced this week.
Things are just, to me anyway, just seem out of control when it comes to immigration. Luke, what do you think?
Well, I think the political parties are all at risk of misleading or misreading the public on this issue. Immigration and Brexit was all about sovereignty. I mean, if you look at the polling that came out immediately prior and immediately after the Brexit vote, sovereignty was the key issue. It was about control. And I don't think it's therefore a straightforward numbers game. It's not like people have desperately panicked about the idea of numbers being at one level or another. What they want is control over their borders, and I think that's why the small boats issue has become so important. It's not necessarily about the numbers, it's about control. It's about the idea that we know who's coming into the country and that we have some degree of sovereignty over that process. So I think that the Tory party need to move away from this obsession with numbers. I think actually the discussion that we've seen this week about the numbers is more about Tory infighting than anything else. It's about this civil war that's breaking out within.
You can understand people's annoyance about the numbers, can you not?
You can understand the annoyance, but I think it's important to recognise it's about a broader issue. It's about sovereignty and control rather than strictly about the numbers. I don't think people, for example, are that outraged by the idea of lots of health workers coming to work in this country or lots of students coming to work in this country. They're worried that we don't have security over our borders, and they're worried that we don't control them, and they're worried that the people making the decisions are not our elected
representatives. We've got the sovereignty now, though, Luke. Look, when I was knocking on doors in the referendum, not one person used to meet the word sovereignty, and a lot of people talked about migration and about numbers. And if you talk knock on doors in the Red Wall, it was all about people coming into the country and undercutting what were perceived as undercutting wages, particularly in things like, you know, what the Australians call tradies, white van man, as we tend to use here as shorthand. And it was all, and that's what people are seeing now, even more so. And of course, we've also seen this week the attempts at Tories promising benefit reform, but actually, of course, what we do also see is real anger from people that they think the benefit system is being gamed and that people should be working when they're not, which is the Tories are trying to address. And of course, the two match, because if you're bringing in 150,000 people to work in the care sector, you're not taking 150,000 people off welfare and into those jobs.
Well, that is a very big issue, and we heard about that in the autumn statement this week, of course, from Jeremy Hunt, saying that there are people who can work, who don't work, and they have to be encouraged back to work. I mean, that is something politicians talk about all the time, but we're not talking about people who are disabled, who can't work, and of course they should be supported. But there are people who could work even some of the time. What did you make of what Jeremy Hunt was talking about in that regard, Luke?
Well, I think there is legitimate anger out there, and I think people should be encouraged back to work. I mean, it really is tinkering around the edges when it comes to the economy. We're ignoring the fact that UK growth has remained completely stagnant. The economy is completely
We've got a whole 0.6% of it coming up next year.
Yeah, exactly.
Very exciting.
I mean, it's just outrageous. And the kind of low productivity of this country's economy is the long-standing systemic problem that neither of the parties are actually willing to engage with.
How do you tackle that?
Well, it's radicalism, I'm afraid, when it comes to the economy. It's looking again at old industries. It's completely root and branch. And Labour have not got any improvement on this position. That neither of the main parties are coming forward with a very radical economic plan for how to boost productivity, for how to grow new industries. There's some talk around green new industries and that sort of thing. But really,
it's not just talk. Labour has a whole plan.
But we have an entire ream of dead industries, dead companies. We need to go back to the beginning on the economy and really look at how we fix productivity, and at the moment neither party has a plan for that.
Is that politically possible?
Is it politically possible is a very good question. Not with these parties. I mean, I really do think that when it comes to economic thinking among the two main parties, what we're seeing is tinkering around the edge. I mean, it was really well illustrated actually in the autumn statement when you had the Chancellor announcing this cut to national insurance while the overall tax burden going up. People can see through this stuff. People know they're getting poorer. And they know they're getting poorer because no government is willing to tackle the very serious underlying problems that this country faces.
And even within 24 hours, you had people saying, right, we're giving you some money back with this tax cut. And then the energy price cap is lifted. Obviously, that's to do with an independent body rather than the government. But people just feel screwed at many occasions. Matthew, talk about productivity and what Labour might do.
Well, I mean, I think the two things that Labour would do is I agree with Luke to a certain extent that what we do need to do is look to the industries of the future. And that's why Labour's got its Green New Deal plan to create those green jobs, which at the moment, particularly because of the investment that President Biden is has put in the United States and the Europeans, the EU has a Green New Deal. We're in danger of losing out on those jobs of the future. But the particular thing that I'm obsessed with is the percentage of people in the workforce. We're still the only major economy which has fewer people in work than it did before the pandemic. And all economic indications are the higher the proportion of people that you get into the workforce, the more productive your economy is. And that's why I think Labour needs to be on the front foot on welfare reform. Yes, taking into account voices from those in the disability lobby who have legitimate points about people who can't work, but being very clear what their plan is to get people back into work. After all, Labour started the welfare to work process. Labour introduced sanctions. I remember the scars on the back from the battles within the Labour Party when they were first introduced. When we took away benefits, we said the 16 and 17-year-olds had to be in education, training or work. They couldn't be a lifelong benefit. Labour started that. It's a process that needs to continue. Labour always needs to remember what it says on the tin, that it's the party of work, it's the party of Labour.
Thanks to Dan from Kent, who has texted in the 87222 with the word talk in your text. Dan says, morning Cardi P, the voice of the people. Europe is in danger of not just huge migration, but the radicalisation that will come with it. Common sense is being lost and conservatism is being wrongly labelled far right. Have a good one. Another person says, Luke Gittos needs to wake up. The vast majority of us are concerned with the number of migrants. And Sarah, who's an RAF veteran in West Sussex, says, hi Peter, having served in the armed forces on a tour of recruitment, conscription is not welcome. That's what another caller was talking about earlier on. She says some form of service in the community, though, would be of value. Maybe some litter picking, NHS porter care and so on, says Sarah. So yes, I mean, it is an interesting one in terms of how you get people to properly commit to the country they're in, and different countries do it in different ways around the world. Another one on migration, Mitch in North London says, Peter, according to research published by the Migration Observatory, 36% of all foreign nationals living in the UK came here under the right to family unification. A further 9% were allowed because they were dependent of someone already living here. That means that close to half of the foreign nationals currently living in this country did not come here to fill the skills gaps in our labour market or even to study. They came here solely on the back of their relationship with somebody else who had already managed to get here. When the criteria for migration to this country is so relaxed, is it any wonder that we have little or no control over the number of migrants coming here? Luke?
Well, I think the deeper problem here is about what we are assimilating people into. There has been a sense in this country that we have no idea of what Britain's really all about, and a sense that the political class have lost any conception of what British values really are. We have had for a long time this discussion around what it means to become British, but I don't think we've resolved that problem, and I think that does create a situation where you have migration into this country with no clear idea as to what you intend to assimilate people into, and I think that can be very frustrating. So we can't put the cart before the horse and say, well, we need to encourage immigration and assimilation unless we have a clear idea as to what it is we are assimilating people into. I think this is another discussion that all the major parties are effectively ignoring, the question about what we do. Reporting in the paper today about whether or not we should take Gazan refugees, which I think is going to become a very key problem.
What do you think?
I think we should have a more humane asylum policy, but we should have a more thoughtful one. I think that at the moment, the laws that govern asylum in this country all date from around the middle of the 20th century. It's clear that asylum laws aren't truly fit for purpose. We need to think about what they're for. But if we are going to have a more generous asylum system, we need to start thinking about how we assimilate people and what we are telling them about what it means to live in Britain. And the longer we have a political establishment who appear to be completely indifferent to what it is to be British, have no real sense of what it is to be British, the more difficult that process is going to be.
Do you feel that way, Matthew? Do you feel that there's an indifference in terms of what being British actually is?
I think the country is in a very anxious state. I think that people are worried not only about their living standards, but they're worried about the future of their country. I actually have said to the Labour leadership that I think they should be talking more about values, and they should be, not just reaming off lists of policy, but talking about what their vision of the country is and what it feels like to be British. So yes, I agree to that extent, and I think that's important in politics. And I think oddly with Rishi's seen as a competent manager, but we've never heard any sense of vision, any sense of what sort of country he wants to build, and particularly as you say after Brexit, when people thought we got our hands back on those levers of power, I think that we have in fact got a vacuum, both a vacuum of policy.
Why is that? Is that down to bad leadership, or is that down to Brexit not being what people thought it was? What is that down to?
I think particularly in terms of leadership, since Brexit, we've had 1, 2, 3, 4. Are we on 4? We're on the 4th Prime Minister since Brexit. I may have missed one out. Forgive me if I have.
May, Boris, Liz Truss, and now Rishi Sunak. Yeah.
And I think that's part of it, because whether you like it or not, when under the last Labour government, we had 2 Titanic figures in Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. A lot of people didn't agree with them, but there was a sense.
Well, I agree with
what they were about.
Titanic, certainly. Certainly that Gordon Brown was something.
It's Saturday.
He moved the economy towards the iceberg.
Northern Irish.
Certainly, yes.
But
it was fine when it left Belfast.
So they say. You're making me laugh, Peter. So you had 2 very substantial figures, who clearly had a sense of vision. I mean, frankly, Gordon's still writing books about his vision of Britain and running a think tank about his vision of Britain. We're not getting that from the leaders that we've had. Yeah. And in fact, all Rishi's big appeal is managerial, steadying the ship. Steadying the ship's one thing, but setting out direction of where the ship is heading is another.
I was once asked, actually, as I'm the chief political commentator on this station as well, as you may know, and I was once asked when Liz Truss was Prime Minister, during those glorious 49 days of brilliance, it was asked, does Liz Truss have a comms problem? And I said, the Titanic didn't have a comms problem, the Titanic had an iceberg problem, just to continue the thoughts here. Let's talk to Stella in Swindon. She's giving us a call as Matthew clears his throat.
I apologise.
That's all right.
You're making me laugh, Pete. That's what's setting me off.
Lots of cold and things going around. Stella, you're very welcome to the programme. Good morning to you. What would you like to say?
Good morning. First of all, I enjoy listening to you.
Thank you, Stella.
You talk a lot of sense. This problem has been ongoing for years, not just in this country. We need... They're able-bodied men. Make use of them. I strongly believe, like that young lady that spoke to you from Shropshire, that we ought to have them in a barracks somewhere away from the people. If they have bad intentions, okay, they're going to do it anyway. So it's best you keep them under your eye and train them to do something, and train them to help our armies, send them to places where they are needed. And when their time is up, say like if they are accepted in 2 years, then offer them to stay here or ship them out.
Okay.
Do you understand?
Yeah, you've got a lot of good thoughts there, Stella. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who want to respond to that as well. Thank you, Stella. There's Stella in Swindon there. Thanks also to Dawn in Chelmsford, who has texted me. He says there's a general issue of helplessness over the migration issue. The two main political parties have no solutions. I fear it will cause unrest in our country. And look, that's along the lines of what you're saying, really. There is such a nervousness and annoyance about this, and very little vision over migration, what it's for, what it's supposed to be.
Well, one thing we might come on to talk about is the emergence of new parties.
Yeah.
Let's not talk about unrest, but let's look at parties like Reform, who are making a kind of more open play for swing Tory voters.
Yeah.
And they're going to be quite key in some of these seats, actually, that the Tories need to hold on to.
Where do you think Reform might be able to pick something up in your estimation? Because in a first-past-the-post system, it's very difficult for a small party, although they're hovering around 8 or 9% at the moment in the polls, Reform UK, to pick up a seat. Do you think they could actually do it this time?
So there were some seats where Tories took them from Labour with a very, very tiny majority, so 700 votes or so, with the Brexit Party in second place at around 3,000. If on this occasion, Reform, there's some fantastic reporting on this in the Telegraph today, if Reform won just 2% of the vote in those key seats, then Labour would get in through the middle. Now, it wouldn't be a Reform seat, but it would be a lost Tory seat.
Yes.
And that, I think, is why this, a lot of the small vote discussion is so key for the Tories, because they're terrified of losing these key seats.
The previous, as you say, the previous iteration of Reform UK, which was the Brexit Party, withdrew from a lot of seats in 2019, and that helped the Boris Johnson's majority to a huge extent. Is there, I mean, you're talking about that article in the Telegraph, does that, I must read it actually after the programme, do they say in there that Reform could actually get an MP for themselves, or are they just in a position where they're handing, well, some would argue handing seats to Labour if they stand or don't stand?
The reporting suggests it's a major risk for the Tory party in losing seats to the Labour Party. I don't think they go so as far as to say that Reform could actually win a seat. But this is a big threat. It goes on to talk about the kinds of voters that Labour are certain to win. Die-cast Remainers, people who don't stop oil, environmentalists. All of those are die-cast for the Labour Party. But the Tories are kind of maintaining a very fragile set of allegiances at the moment from voters who were pro-Brexit, broadly sceptical about immigration, and want restored sovereignty over our borders. That's a key battleground for the Tories at the next election, and Reform and parties like them are nipping at their heels on these key issues.
Matthew, I would imagine that Reform UK, their manifesto is not one that you would vote for, but are there some in the Labour movement who are sort of thinking, actually, hold on a second, these guys could help?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, if Reform take even a few percent in those key seats, that's vital. I mean, what happened at the last election is that the Brexit Party withdrew from Tory-held seats, but it was still stood in Labour seats, and what were regarded as safe Labour seats. And if you talk to quite a lot of MPs in the Red Wall, the Brexit Party in effect saved them. Yeah. I have an MP friend from Barnsley. The Brexit Party literally say, she would have had a Tory MP would have sneaked through the middle. I think there were two issues. I mean, I'm older than you two, so I remember the '97 election when Jimmy.
I remember it too.
Oh, you were very young. I wasn't that old, but I had hair then. But when Jimmy Goldsmith's referendum party sent every voter in the country a VHS.
Did they really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
This is seen as remarkably innovative campaigning for the time. Shows how 25 years difference in politics.
Yes.
But of course, Jimmy Goldsmith's party did less well than Reform. It only took a few percent. But including on the night where he stood in Putney and he stood behind David Mello, and famous footage that's, I'm sure, out there on YouTube, they did actually make the difference in just making that Labour majority into a super majority, which is what it became. One thing though you say about the die-cast chances of people, just stop oil, etc. One thing Labour will be a little bit worried about, although it won't talk about it, is the Greens. Now, at the moment, the Greens' local government success, which they're having, tends to be in places where you'd have expected the Lib Dems to do well. They're dominant in councils in rural Suffolk at the moment, as a Green revolution going on, not natural Labour territory. So that's okay. But Labour will be... if I was a Labour strategist, their big worry will be that the Greens are the party that people turn to if Labour in government doesn't doesn't do everything that the Guardian Easter vote would want, and that they will start losing votes to that. And once you lose 4, 5, 6% in marginal seats to the Greens, and remember, there's a Guardian Easter vote even in marginal seats, because you've got teachers, public sector workers, etc., who are more likely to be of that ilk, then that then becomes a problem. So at the moment, it's okay. When I worked for Ed Miliband, and it was going to be a very tight election, we hoped. It was not as tight as we wanted it to be in 2015. We were they were slightly over-obsessed with the Greens, because, again, we had a Green strategy, but we didn't have a strategy for senior citizens. And I said, maybe we should have those.
Maybe we should do that.
But that's a fear for them, because the Greens sort of are still, they're a bit below reform, but they're normally in the high single figures, and that becomes an issue for everybody has to think about them.
Okay, well, thanks to Ali, who has texted in and says, Peter, I hate being aligned to a former Labour advisor. Sorry, Matthew, but he is right, says Ali.
Thank you,
he was a Remainer, but to take him on the chin when we went out, but I was screaming at everyone, do they really believe out would mean less immigration? They were lied to, and yes, we are very angry now. Leslie says, we are held in contempt by both parties. Democracy, ? When there is doubt, Starmer will in some way take us closer to the EU. Well, actually, it's David Cameron who's talking about that today, Leslie. We'll talk about that after the break, that this should be ever considered at all. Roger says, why is it taken until November 23 for ministers to suddenly wake up and realise immigration is too high? Were they asleep or in denial for the last 13 years? Well, we've had so much talk about this. Of course, even David Cameron, talking about him, said he wanted to take immigration down to the tens of thousands from the hundreds of thousands. Now it's 700,000, 745,000. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about David Cameron after the break.